The wind howled through the cracks of the old wooden house, carrying with it the scent of rain and the chill of a night that seemed endless. A boy sat on the steps of the porch, his arms wrapped around his knees, staring into the darkness. His name was Liam. At 15, he had already learned that life could be unkind. The world had never felt fair to him. His father had walked away when he was a child, leaving behind only memories and unanswered questions. His mother worked tirelessly at a diner, barely making enough to keep the lights on. School wasn't any better. He was just another face in the crowd, ignored by some, mocked by others. Every day felt like a battle he was losing. Liam wasn't sure when he had started feeling this way, but lately, the weight on his chest had grown heavier. Dreams felt like distant illusions, hope like a fading whisper. He had tried to push through, to believe that maybe things would change, but every time he looked around, all he saw were reasons to give up. One evening, after another long day of feeling invisible, Liam wandered through the empty streets of his small town. His feet carried him without thought, past dimly lit shops and shuttered windows, until he found himself at the edge of an old bookstore, the kind that people hardly noticed anymore. The sign above the door was worn, the letters faded, but the warm glow from inside seemed to call him in. He stepped through the creaky door, the scent of old paper and ink filling his senses. The store was quiet, except for the sound of a pen scratching against paper. Behind the counter sat an old man with silver hair, writing in a notebook. He looked up, his eyes filled with something Liam couldn't quite understand. Kindness, maybe, or something deeper. Looking for something? The man asked, his voice gentle. Liam hesitated. I don't know, he admitted. The man set his pen down and leaned forward slightly. Sometimes, when we don't know what we're looking for, we end up finding exactly what we need. Liam almost laughed, but something in the way the man spoke made him pause. There was no pity in his voice, no judgment, just understanding. The man gestured to the rows of books lining the shelves. Books are filled with wisdom. Some of it we find when we need it most. He tapped the counter lightly. But the real wisdom, the kind that changes lives, is the kind we carry within us. Liam frowned. What does that mean? The old man smiled. It means that the answers you seek aren't in the world around you. They're inside you, waiting to be discovered. Liam wasn't sure why, but his chest ached at those words. He had spent so much time feeling lost, feeling like nothing mattered. Could it really be possible that he already had what he needed? Before he could ask, the man reached under the counter and pulled out a small, worn book. He slid it toward Liam. Take this, he said. Read it. And when you're ready, come back and tell me what you've learned. Liam hesitated before taking the book. The cover was scratched, the pages yellowed with time. He had no idea why this book, of all things, would change anything. But something about the old man, his voice, his presence, made Liam feel like maybe, just maybe, it was worth a try. As he stepped back into the cold night, the book tucked under his arm, he had no idea that this moment would be the beginning of something he never expected. A journey of discovery, of change, of wisdom, and perhaps, just perhaps, of hope. Liam walked home with the small book pressed against his chest, the night air wrapping around him like a silent companion. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the pavement. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man's words. The answers you seek aren't in the world around you. They're inside you. It sounded like something out of a story, not real life. Not his life. When he reached home, the house was dark except for the faint glow from his mother's room. He could hear the low hum of the television, her usual routine after another exhausting shift. He didn't want to wake her, so he slipped into his small room, closing the door softly behind him. Sitting on his bed, he turned the book over in his hands. There was no title on the cover, just a simple leather binding that had been worn smooth with time. The pages inside were filled with neat handwriting, not printed text. He traced his fingers over the words, his mind filled with questions. Who had written this? Why had the old man given it to him? And most importantly, would it really change anything? Liam hesitated before turning to the first page. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. The lost often believe they have no path. But the truth is, the path is always there. The question is, do they dare to walk it? He exhaled slowly, feeling something shift inside him, like a door opening just a crack. He kept reading. When life feels like an endless night, it is not the world that must change, but the eyes through which we see it. Liam frowned. He wasn't sure he understood, but something about the words made his chest tighten. He read a few more lines before his eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling him under. The book rested on his chest as he drifted into sleep. The dreams came almost instantly. He was standing in a vast empty field under a sky without stars. The air was thick, heavy, and in the distance, he could hear whispers. They weren't menacing, but they weren't comforting either. They felt like echoes of something long forgotten. He turned in circles, searching for the source of the voices, but there was nothing. No one. Just him and the endless darkness. Then, a light. Faint at first, flickering like a candle in the wind. But it grew brighter, and with it, the whispers became clearer. Words formed, though they still made no sense. Seek and you shall find. Liam reached out toward the light, but before he could touch it, he woke up with a sharp breath. His heart pounded against his ribs. His room was silent except for the distant sound of a car passing outside. The book was still resting on his chest, as if waiting for him. His fingers curled around it. He didn't believe in signs. Not really. But this felt different. The next morning, he left early, slipping out of the house before his mother woke up. He needed to go back to the bookstore. He needed answers. The streets were quieter in the early hours, the town still shaking off the grip of sleep. When he reached the bookstore, his stomach twisted. The door was shut, the lights inside dim. He tried the handle. Locked. Liam stepped back, looking up at the worn sign above the door. He hadn't even checked the name of the place the night before. But now, as he stared at the faded letters, he felt something cold trickle down his spine. The sign read, Ellis and Sons, EST 1923. That didn't seem strange, at first. But beneath the name, in even smaller letters, were the words, closed permanently. Liam's breath caught in his throat. He took a step closer, pressing his palm against the glass. The inside looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Books lined the shelves, the counter was cluttered with papers, and yet, something felt off. Had he imagined the old man? No. He had the book. The book was real. But if the store had been closed, how had he gone inside? How had he spoken to the man? His fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. He needed to know more. Liam turned and walked away, his mind racing. He decided to check the library. If the store had really been closed for a long time, someone had to know something. The library was quiet, the scent of old books familiar but strangely suffocating today. He approached the front desk where Mrs. Callahan, the town's librarian, sat sorting through a stack of papers. She had been working there for as long as Liam could remember. If anyone knew about the bookstore, it would be her. Mrs. Callahan? She looked up, her glasses sliding down her nose. Liam. Haven't seen you in a while. Yeah, he said, shifting on his feet. I had a question. Do you know anything about an old bookstore? Ellis and Sons? Her expression changed, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. That's a name I haven't heard in years. She set down her papers. Why do you ask? Liam hesitated. I thought I saw it open. But then I went back, and it was closed. The sign says it's been shut down permanently. Mrs. Callahan was quiet for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. Ellis and Sons closed nearly 20 years ago, she finally said. Mr. Ellis, the owner, passed away. No one took over the shop. Liam's stomach dropped. 20 years ago? She nodded. The building's been empty ever since. Liam felt the weight of the book in his bag. The old man. The conversation. The warmth of the store. Had he imagined all of it? But that didn't make sense. He still had the book. He had read the words written inside. Mrs. Callahan studied him closely. "Why do you ask, Liam?" He shook his head. "No reason. Just curious." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press him further. "Well, be careful wandering into places like that," she said. "Some stories should stay in the past." Liam nodded, but his mind was already spinning. As he stepped back out into the sunlight, the weight of the book in his bag felt heavier than before. He knew one thing for certain now. This wasn't just a book. And the old man wasn't just anyone. Something was happening. Something he couldn't explain. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to find out the truth. Liam walked home in a daze, the librarian's words echoing in his mind. Ellis and Sons closed nearly 20 years ago. How could that be true when he had stepped inside just last night? He had seen the old man, heard his voice, felt the book in his hands. It wasn't a dream. It couldn't be. His fingers brushed against the edges of the book in his backpack, the rough leather grounding him in reality. He needed answers, but he had no idea where to start. His mother always told him that some things didn't have explanations, that life was full of mysteries no one could solve. But this wasn't just some unanswered question, this was something impossible. By the time he reached home, his head ached from all the thinking. His mother was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. The tired lines around her eyes were deeper than usual, and Liam knew she had probably worked late again. "Hey, sweetheart," she said without looking up. "You hungry?" Liam hesitated. He wanted to ask her about the bookstore, about Mr. Ellis, but he wasn't sure how to bring it up. Instead, he muttered, "Yeah, a little." She nodded and handed him a plate, her movements slow, exhausted. Liam sat at the table, pushing the food around his plate. The book in his bag felt like it was calling to him, but he forced himself to stay present. "Mom," he finally said, "do you remember a bookstore called Ellis and Sons?" She froze for just a second, barely noticeable, before turning to him with a neutral expression. "Why do you ask?" Liam swallowed. I heard about it. Thought maybe you knew something." She sighed and leaned against the counter. "I remember it," she admitted. "It was a small place. Mr. Ellis was a kind man, always had time to talk to people. Your grandfather used to take me there when I was a kid." Liam's heart skipped. "You knew him?" "A little," she said, frowning as if digging through old memories. "He was quiet, but wise. People said he had a way of knowing things, like he could see straight into your soul. But he passed a long time ago, Liam. That store's been closed ever since." Liam gripped his fork. "Did he have any family? A son, maybe?" His mother shook her head. "No. As far as I know, he was alone." Liam's stomach twisted. If Mr. Ellis had no family, then who had he spoken to last night? He forced himself to finish his dinner, making small talk with his mom before retreating to his room. The second he closed the door, he pulled out the book and flipped through the pages. There were no author names, no markings, just page after page of handwritten words, filled with wisdom and strange, thought-provoking ideas. "Fear is a door. You can either keep it locked, or you can step through and see what waits on the other side. The lost are never truly lost. They are simply waiting to be found." Liam exhaled sharply. The words felt personal, as if they had been written for him. But how was that possible? That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself back in the endless field from his dreams. The whispers were louder this time, forming fragmented sentences. He could hear his own name woven into them. The light in the distance flickered, shifting like a heartbeat. And then, for the first time, he saw something else. A shadowed figure, standing just beyond the glow, watching him. Liam jolted awake, sweat clinging to his skin. His breaths came fast, his chest tightening. He sat up, pressing his palms against his face. He didn't know what was happening, but he couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day at school, he could barely focus. The words in his textbooks blurred together, his mind consumed by the book, by the old man, by the dreams that felt more real every night. When the final bell rang, he barely heard it. As he gathered his things, a voice broke through his thoughts. "Hey, Liam!" He looked up to see Nora standing by his desk. She was one of the few people who didn't treat him like he was invisible. They weren't exactly friends, but she had a way of noticing things no one else did. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. Liam hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She didn't look convinced. "You've been weird all day." He considered brushing her off, but something about the way she looked at him made him pause. Maybe he needed to talk to someone. Maybe saying it out loud would make it feel less overwhelming. "Do you believe in things that can't be explained?" he asked. Nora raised an eyebrow. "Like ghosts? Or fate? Or what?" "Anything," Liam said. "Things that aren't supposed to be real but are." Nora studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't know. I think the world's a lot stranger than people want to admit." Liam hesitated, then pulled his backpack onto his lap. He unzipped it and carefully took out the book, placing it on his desk. "I got this from a bookstore last night," he said. "But the bookstore's been closed for 20 years. Nora frowned. "That's weird." She reached out, brushing her fingers over the cover. "What's inside?" "Words," Liam said. "But they feel like more than that." Nora opened the book and scanned a few lines. Her brow furrowed. "This handwriting looks old." "Like, really old." Liam swallowed. "I know." Nora was quiet for a moment before she carefully shut the book. "You think the guy who gave this to you was a ghost?" Liam exhaled. "I don't know what I think." Nora studied him. "So what now?" Liam shook his head. "I don't know. But I need to figure it out." For the first time, he wasn't alone in this. But the answers they were looking for were still out there, waiting. And something told Liam that he was running out of time to find them. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Ever since he had shown the book to Nora, the air around him felt different, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The words inside the book whispered to him even when it was closed, their meaning slipping just beyond his grasp. And the dreams, they were getting worse. Every night, he returned to the empty field beneath the starless sky. The whispers had grown louder, no longer just echoes but full sentences, speaking in a voice that felt both familiar and distant. The shadowed figure still lingered at the edge of the light, unmoving, waiting. But last night had been different. The figure had taken a step closer. Liam had woken up gasping, his body drenched in sweat. He didn't know what would happen if the figure reached him, but something inside him whispered that he wasn't ready to find out. At school, Nora noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said, nudging him in the hallway. "Feels like it," Liam muttered. Nora glanced around before leaning in. "I did some research last night," she whispered. "On Mr. Ellis." Liam's heart skipped. "And?" "There's barely anything about him online, which is weird because usually, old businesses at least have some records," she said. "But I did find something. A newspaper article from 20 years ago." Liam tensed. "What did it say?" Nora lowered her voice. "It said Mr. Ellis disappeared." Liam stared at her. "Disappeared?" "Yeah," she nodded. "They never found him." The article said people assumed he left town, but the weirdest part? The bookstore closed overnight. No one ever saw it happen. One day it was open, the next, Gone. Like it never existed. Liam's mind raced. That doesn't make sense. None of this does, Nora said. But it gets stranger. I showed the article to my grandpa. He's lived here forever, and he swears that Mr. Ellis wasn't just some bookstore owner. People used to say he knew things. That he could read people in a way that wasn't normal. Liam's fingers curled around the strap of his backpack. He thought about the way the old man had spoken to him, how his words had felt like they were meant just for him. What if? Liam hesitated. What if he never really left? Nora frowned. What do you mean? What if he's still here? Liam said. Just not in the way we understand. Nora's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Like a ghost. Liam swallowed. Or something else. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the weight of the thought settling between them. Then Nora straightened. We have to go back. Liam blinked. To the bookstore? Yes, she said. If you got inside once, maybe we can do it again. Liam hesitated. The thought of stepping back into that place sent a shiver down his spine. But he knew she was right. The only way to get answers was to go back to where it all started. That evening, just as the sun began to set, they made their way to the abandoned bookstore. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the town itself knew something was about to happen. When they reached the building, Liam felt his stomach tighten. It looked the same as before. Dark. Empty. Silent. The sign still read closed permanently. But somehow it felt alive. Are you sure about this? Liam asked. Nora glanced at him. Are you? He wasn't. But he nodded anyway. They stepped toward the door. Liam reached for the handle, expecting it to be locked. But the moment his fingers touched it, the door creaked open on its own. Nora sucked in a breath. Okay. That's not normal. Liam didn't respond. He stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. The dim glow from the streetlights outside cast long shadows across the shelves. Everything looked exactly as it had the first time. But there was something different now. Something watching. Nora whispered, "Do you feel that?" Liam nodded. It was an awareness, a presence pressing against his skin. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't welcoming either. He took another step forward. "Mr. Ellis?" The silence that followed was heavier than before. Then, a whisper. "You came back." Liam's breath caught. The voice wasn't loud, but it filled the space like an echo through time. Nora grabbed his arm. "Tell me you heard that." Liam nodded, his heart pounding. "Where are you?" he called. A rustling sound came from deeper inside the store. The rows of books seemed to stretch longer than before, as if the space had shifted, bending reality itself. Nora squeezed his arm. "This is a bad idea." Liam knew she was right. But he couldn't leave now. He had to know. He took another step forward. The whisper returned, closer this time. "You seek answers." Liam swallowed hard. "Yes." The air grew colder, the shadows deepening. Then, slowly, from between the shelves, a figure emerged. Liam felt his blood turn to ice. It was the same silhouette from his dreams. But now, it wasn't just a shadow. It was a man. Mr. Ellis. His face was worn, his eyes deep and knowing. He looked exactly as Liam remembered him from that first night. But there was something else, a weight in his gaze, a sadness that stretched beyond time. "You should not have come back," Mr. Ellis said, his voice gentle but firm. Liam's pulse pounded in his ears. "I need to understand," he said. "Who are you? What is this book?" Mr. Ellis studied him for a long moment. Then, he exhaled. "The book is more than words," he said. "It is a key." Liam's throat went dry. "A key to what?" Mr. Ellis glanced toward the rows of bookshelves, his expression unreadable. "To the truth. To what has been forgotten." Nora whispered, "This is insane." Liam's hands clenched into fists. "Then tell me. What truth?" Mr. Ellis's gaze darkened. "The truth is not always meant to be found." The words sent a shiver through Liam's spine. But before he could respond, the bookstore shifted. The air trembled, the shelves shaking as if the building itself was breathing. The whispers that had haunted Liam's dreams grew louder, swirling around them. And then, the lights went out. Total darkness. Liam's heart slammed against his ribs. He reached out, searching for Nora, but the air had changed. It was thick, suffocating. The whispering grew deafening, filling his ears with words he couldn't understand. And then, cutting through the noise, was Mr. Ellis's voice, urgent and sharp. "You must leave. Now." Liam tried to move, but the darkness was alive, pressing against him, pulling him deeper. And somewhere, in the suffocating black, he felt it. Another presence. Something else was here. Something that did not want him to find the truth. Liam's breath came in short, shallow gasps as the darkness wrapped around him like a living thing. He couldn't see Nora. He couldn't see anything. The only sound was the relentless whispering, growing louder, circling him like a storm. His mind screamed for him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. It was as if the very air had thickened, trapping him in place. Then, just as panic threatened to consume him, a hand grabbed his wrist. "Liam." It was Nora. Her voice was tight with fear, but it was real, grounding him. He clutched onto her hand like a lifeline. "We have to get out," he shouted, barely able to hear himself over the growing whispers. Mr. Ellis's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. "Close your eyes. Now." Liam obeyed without question, squeezing his eyes shut. And then, silence. The air shifted. The weight pressing against his chest suddenly lifted, and the tension in the room snapped like a frayed wire. He felt the ground beneath his feet steady, the suffocating force around him dissolving. "Open them," Mr. Ellis said. Liam did. They were no longer in the bookstore. Instead, they stood in the middle of a vast, endless void. No walls, no floor, just an expanse of swirling gray mist stretching in every direction. It was neither cold nor warm, neither bright nor dark. The only solid thing was the book still clutched tightly in Liam's hands. Nora let out a shaky breath. "Okay, what just happened?" Liam turned to Mr. Ellis, whose expression was unreadable. "Where are we?" Liam demanded. "The space in between," Mr. Ellis said. "Between what is real and what has been forgotten." Liam's fingers dug into the book's cover. "I don't understand. What was that thing in the bookstore?" Mr. Ellis's gaze darkened. "Something that was never meant to be disturbed." Liam swallowed hard. "But why? What does it want?" Mr. Ellis hesitated, his eyes flickering to the book. "Not everything that seeks you wishes to be found. There are forces in this world that feed on knowledge not meant for human hands." Liam's stomach twisted. "Then why did you give me the book?" "Because you are different," Mr. Ellis said. "Because you are meant to know." Nora shook her head. "This doesn't make sense. If he's meant to know, why is something trying to stop him?" Mr. Ellis exhaled. "Because knowing the truth changes everything." Liam felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He had spent his whole life feeling lost, like a puzzle missing too many pieces. Now, he was starting to realize the pieces had been hidden from him all along. "Tell me," Liam said. "Tell me what this book is really for." Mr. Ellis studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand, and the mist around them shifted. Suddenly, shapes formed in the distance, faint at first, then clearer. Shadows of buildings, streets, people. It was their town, but not as they knew it. The edges flickered like an old film reel, the colors muted and strange. Liam's heart pounded. "What is this?" Mr. Ellis's voice was heavy. The past. Liam watched in stunned silence as ghostly figures moved through the streets. Then his breath caught. There, walking past the bookstore, was his mother. But she was young, a teenager, and she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a boy who looked eerily familiar. Liam's pulse raced. "That's your grandfather," Mr. Ellis finished. Liam's mind reeled. His grandfather had passed before he was born. He had only seen photos, but there was no mistaking it. His mother and grandfather were standing in front of Ellis and Sons, talking to someone at the entrance. Liam's stomach dropped when he realized who it was. "Mr. Ellis." "You knew them," Liam whispered. Mr. Ellis nodded. "Yes. And your mother. She once held this book, just as you do now." Liam turned to him in shock. "What?" "She was given a choice," Mr. Ellis said. "To see the truth, or to forget." Liam's throat tightened. His mother had known about this? "She chose to forget," Mr. Ellis said softly. Liam felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. His mother had been where he was now. She had been given the book. She had been given the chance to know. And she had walked away. But why? Liam asked. Why would she choose that? Mr. Ellis's gaze was somber. Because sometimes, the truth is too heavy to carry. Liam's hands clenched around the book. His mother had kept this from him his entire life. But why? What had she seen that made her turn away? Before he could ask, the mist shifted again. The scene before them changed. No longer the past, but something else. A doorway appeared in the fog. Dark. Ominous. Liam felt his chest tighten. Mr. Ellis's voice was quiet but firm. "You are being given the same choice." Liam stared at the door. Somehow, he already knew, if he stepped through it, there would be no going back. Nora's voice broke the silence. "Liam, you don't have to do this." Liam looked at her. She was scared. But beneath that, he saw something else. Trust. She believed in him, no matter what he chose. Liam turned back to the door, his pulse hammering. The whispers were back, curling through the air. But this time, they weren't threatening. They were waiting. Waiting for him to decide. Liam's heartbeat echoed in his ears as he stared at the dark doorway. The whispers danced around him, neither threatening nor inviting, just waiting. His hands trembled as he gripped the book tighter. This was it. The choice his mother had faced. The choice that would change everything. Mr. Ellis stood beside him, watching with knowing eyes. "Once you step through, there is no turning back," he said softly. "The truth is not something you can unsee." Liam swallowed hard. His mother had chosen to walk away, to forget. But he wasn't her. He had spent too long searching for answers, too long feeling like something was missing. If he turned away now, he knew the questions would haunt him forever. He took a deep breath, then stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the world collapsed. A rush of wind tore through the mist, swallowing everything in darkness. Liam felt himself falling, not through space, but through something deeper, as if he were sinking into time itself. Voices swirled around him, whispering, shouting, pleading. Then, silence. Liam blinked. He was standing in a vast, endless library. But this was no ordinary library. The shelves stretched far beyond what his eyes could see, curving into the distance like an infinite maze. The air hummed with energy, and the books were alive. They pulsed, their covers shifting as if breathing. Some hovered off the shelves, flipping their own pages. Others whispered softly, their voices merging into an eerie, rhythmic murmur. Nora's sharp intake of breath told him she was still beside him. "What is this place?" "The archive of the forgotten," Mr. Ellis said, stepping forward. His voice was almost reverent. "Every lost truth, every untold story, every memory erased from history, they all end up here." Liam turned in awe. The sheer weight of the knowledge contained in this place sent a shiver down his spine. "Then why are they forgotten?" he asked. Mr. Ellis's gaze darkened. "Because not all truths are meant to be remembered." Liam's grip tightened on the book. He had come too far for riddles. "Why did my mother choose to forget?" Mr. Ellis hesitated. Then, with a wave of his hand, one of the books floated toward him. It hovered in front of Liam, its leather cover worn but pulsing with warmth. Liam reached out, his fingers brushing against it. The moment he touched it, the library vanished. He was no longer standing. He was watching. A vision unfolded before him. His mother, younger, standing in this very library. She clutched the same book Liam now held, her expression one of pure terror. And beside her stood another figure, his grandfather. Liam watched as his mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she whispered. "I don't want this. I don't want to know." His grandfather placed a hand on her shoulder. "Some truths are too heavy to bear, my love. But the burden must fall to someone." His mother looked down at the book, then back at him. "Then let it be forgotten." Liam gasped as the scene shattered around him. He was back in the library, his heart pounding. He turned to Mr. Ellis, realization hitting him like a tidal wave. "My grandfather knew," Liam said. "He knew all along. And my mother chose to forget." Mr. Ellis nodded. "Your family has always been tied to this place. The knowledge within these walls runs through your bloodline. But your mother, she could not bear it." Liam's mind spun. His mother had made her choice, but now he had to make his. He looked at the book in his hands. The truth his mother had feared. The knowledge that had been hidden from him all his life. He could leave it behind. Walk away like she had. Forget. Or he could know. Liam took a deep breath. Then slowly, deliberately, he opened the book. The moment the pages parted, light erupted from within, engulfing him in a rush of memories, not his own but history itself. He saw lost civilizations, erased from time. He saw whispered secrets, concealed by those in power. He saw the delicate balance of knowledge and ignorance, how every forgotten truth had shaped the world in ways unseen. And then, at the very end, he saw himself, not as he was now but as he would be. A guardian, a keeper of forgotten things, a protector of knowledge too dangerous to be left unchecked. The light faded, and Liam gasped, staggering back. The book fell shut in his hands, but he no longer felt its weight. Because now he understood. Mr. Ellis watched him carefully. "Now you see," he said. Liam exhaled shakily. He did see. But then, a new question formed in his mind, one that sent a chill through him. "If this knowledge has always been hidden," Liam said slowly, "then why me? Why now?" Mr. Ellis hesitated, and in that moment, Liam saw something in his eyes he hadn't noticed before. Fear. "Because something is coming," Mr. Ellis finally said. "And you are the only one who can stop it." Liam's breath caught. The weight of the book in his hands no longer felt like a choice. It felt like a warning. Liam stood frozen, the weight of Mr. Ellis's words settling deep into his bones. "Something is coming." The way he said it, quiet, deliberate, fearful, sent a cold shiver down Liam's spine. He looked at the book in his hands, no longer just pages and ink but a responsibility far heavier than he had ever imagined. Nora was beside him, her eyes scanning his face, searching for answers. "Liam, what does this mean?" Liam swallowed hard, forcing himself to steady his breathing. He had spent so much of his life feeling lost, searching for a purpose he could never quite grasp. Now he had found it. But it wasn't the answer he had expected. "It means," Liam said slowly, "that I can't walk away from this." Mr. Ellis gave a solemn nod. "You were meant to know. And now that you do, the choice is no longer whether you want to be a part of this, but whether you're ready to face what comes next. Liam turned to the endless shelves around them, the archive of the forgotten stretching into eternity. So much hidden knowledge, so many stories buried under time's relentless march. And somewhere within it all, an unseen danger, waiting. He had 1,000 questions, but only one mattered now. What is coming? Mr. Ellis's expression darkened. For centuries, knowledge has been hidden, erased, kept out of the wrong hands. But someone, is trying to undo that. To bring forgotten truths back into the world, not to protect them, but to use them for something far worse. Liam's grip tightened on the book. And I'm the only one who can stop it? You're the only one who can remember, Mr. Ellis corrected. That makes you more powerful than you realize. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Liam's entire life, he had felt like he didn't belong. But maybe it wasn't because he was lost. Maybe it was because he was waiting for this moment. He let out a slow breath, his mind racing. If someone or something was trying to unearth dangerous truths, he couldn't just stand by. The knowledge he carried wasn't just about the past. It was about protecting the future. Nora reached for his hand. Whatever this is, you're not doing it alone. Liam met her gaze and felt an unexpected warmth. She had been with him through all of this, through the confusion, the fear, the impossible discoveries. He didn't have to carry this burden alone. Mr. Ellis gave a small smile, the first real warmth Liam had seen from him. Then it begins. The library around them shimmered, the air humming with energy. The door they had stepped through reappeared, waiting. Liam turned back to Mr. Ellis. Will I see you again? Mr. Ellis nodded. This is not the end, Liam. It is only the beginning. Liam took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The world shifted. He was back in the bookstore. The familiar scent of old paper and ink surrounded him. The soft hum of the city beyond the windows reminded him that, to everyone else, nothing had changed. But he had changed. The book was still in his hands, though it felt lighter now, as if it had given him everything he needed. He turned to Nora, who looked just as shaken, just as changed as he was. She gave him a small smile. So, what now? Liam looked down at the book, running his fingers over the cover. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he would find them. He looked up, determination settling in his chest. Now, we find out who's trying to bring back the forgotten. Nora smirked. And stop them? Liam nodded. And stop them. As they stepped out of the bookstore, the sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows on the quiet street. The world felt the same, but Liam knew better. Somewhere beyond what the eye could see, forces were shifting, preparing. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. Because now he knew. And knowledge was the most powerful thing of all.